Not only this bill, but this issue of racial harmony is one that resonates deeply with me. As someone of mixed race parentage, I recall my late mother telling me how, as a Chinese lady dating an Indian man in the 1960s in Singapore, there were more few occasions where they were subject to some rather unkind comments, and there were even places in Singapore that she and my father could not go to as a mixed race couple because of a very real threat of physical violence. My mother also shared the story of how, as a teenage girl, she had to go to the hospital to identify the body of a minority race friend who had been killed when he was innocently swept up in a racially charged act of violence. And I can still recall the deep emotion in her voice as she told me this story, with a somber reminder of how we should never, ever take racial harmony in Singapore for granted. And it's with these words in mind that I rise in full support of this bill. In this regard, I think it's timely that the government introduces the Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act as a standalone piece of legislation to deal with potential threats to racial harmony and to signal the importance of maintaining racial harmony in Singapore. I applaud the government's position, Mr. Speaker, that criminal prosecution is not the first recourse and sole remedy to racial incidents, considering that a good number of such incidents were not committed with the intent to injure anyone's feelings, but largely arising from a lack of cultural understanding and sensitivity. An effective community remedial initiative must be supported by a structured set of interventions that are evidence-based so that it can achieve its intent to help those who are undergoing the interventions to understand the impact of his or her conduct, reconcile, and make amends within the community. I hope that the government can shed light on how such interventions are developed and delivered, and would like to ask if the government will be setting up an expert task force to design, implement, and oversee the remedial initiative. I would also like to ask, how would the effectiveness of these community remedial initiatives be measured so that their efficacy can be assessed? And with each transgression being different, would the government be offering targeted interventions so that maximum levels of reconciliation can be achieved? And finally, would recalcitrant offenders be referred to for prosecution if the community remedial initiative fails to work for them, even though their offences might not be sufficiently egregious to warrant prosecution under the current penal code? I would also like to suggest that we consider using the interracial and religious confidence circles, or IRCCs, to rehabilitate individuals who are referred to the community remedial initiative. The IRCCs are already there, they are present, and they have been a key pillar of helping to maintain racial and religious harmony in Singapore. Perhaps the remediation process using the IRCCs could be similar to how radicalized individuals are currently being rehabilitated, but at a less severe step-down level within the community. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, reconciliation is a two-party effort. While we can mandate that offenders undergo remedial initiatives, the community must also embrace magnanimity and be willing to forgive the offenders if the offenders are contrite and they demonstrate a willingness to make amends and rebuild bridges. I'd like to now talk about how we can safeguard racial harmony from foreign influence. This bill also introduces measures against foreign influence by requiring entities, including unincorporated associations, to abide by rules governing donations, affiliations, and leadership. While it would be fairly legislatively simple to compel registered entities to disclose their sources or source of donations, foreign affiliations, if any, and the composition of their governing body, how does the government intend to compel unincorporated associations to do the same? This is under the assumption that these associations are informal entities that are loose gatherings of like-minded individuals that the government does not necessarily have oversight of or has much information on. As such, I hope that the government can shed more light on how it plans to exercise supervision over these entities. And under the provision to safeguard designated entities from foreign influence, more than half of their governing bodies must be Singaporeans, and the responsible officer for such entities must be either Singaporeans or permanent residents. While these nationality-based restrictions may, in theory, safeguard designated entities from foreign influences, such arrangement might not provide sufficient guardrails. For example, the leadership team of a designated entity could comprise mainly newly naturalized Singaporeans or PRs who may still have personal historical linkages to foreign entities. Now, while I believe that we should not, and I say again, we should not unfairly shine the spotlight on newly naturalized Singaporeans or PRs, it is empirically difficult for the government to police personal affiliations of individuals, both local-born and naturalized alike. So in this regard, I would like to suggest an additional safeguard that I hope the government can consider, the implementation of two-tier structures for designated entities. For designated entities that have a lower risk of foreign influence or are regarded as less nationally critical, the nationality-based restrictions on their governing bodies and leaders proposed by this bill would suffice as safeguards. However, for designated entities that have a higher possibility of being influenced by foreign actors or are regarded as nationally critical if compromised, for example, cooperative societies, trade unions, mutual benefit organizations, and platform worker associations and the like, the government could legislate more thorough background checks on their proposed leaders before these individuals are appointed into the governing bodies or leadership team. I believe that such background checks would help to provide additional guardrails by restricting local-born and naturalized Singaporeans with tangible and established foreign affiliations from holding leadership positions in such designated entities. Mr. Speaker, sir, racial harmony in Singapore must never be taken lightly because it is an integral component of social cohesion and social trust in a multiracial, multi-religious society. A socially harmonious, cohesive and high-trust society will ultimately strengthen the stability of communities and the resilience of Singapore. I'm glad that the government is sending a strong signal on the importance of racial harmony with this bill, because in the words of someone very dear to me who once lived through the racial turbulence of the past, we should never, ever take Singapore's racial harmony for granted.